Netflix just dropped their highly anticipated Tomb Raider anime, and while critics are raving about its bold choices, fans of Lara Croft are fuming. Why? It's not the epic adventure we all expected. Critical Drinker himself breaks down exactly where the show went wrong, especially with Lara's character. From turning her into something unrecognizable to pushing agenda-driven storytelling, it seems Netflix missed the mark. But how bad is it really? Did Netflix just destroy one of gaming's most iconic characters? Let's dive in.
So, you may have noticed that I've been away for a week or so, doing my best to drink every bar in New England dry, and generally having a delightful time away from YouTube. But hey, all good things have got to come to an end, and in my case, they ended on the flight home, where I decided to kill some time by firing up Netflix and watching a few episodes of Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft. I mean, really, when you've got a smoking hot, kick-ass woman as your main character, action, adventure, and exotic locations, how can you really go wrong?
What face is that?
My thinking one.
Jesus wept. Honestly, apart from the god-awful Resident Evil series that I'm still having therapy for, I don't think I've seen any show misuse its source material in such spectacular fashion before. Tomb Raider is a fucking embarrassment that shames the very name of Lara Croft, sacrifices character and story integrity to work in all the tedious and cringy tropes of modern writing, wastes its talented voice cast on clunky dialogue, and rams it all home with shitty animation that looks about 20 years out of date. In short, it's a boring and pandering mess that proves once again why Lara Croft absolutely cannot be adapted for modern audiences.
Netflix has finally released its much-anticipated anime-style Tomb Raider series, which has sparked a huge reaction. While certain journalists have been quick to heap praise on the show, calling it the best portrayal of Lara Croft we've ever seen, the reasons behind their admiration seem more politically charged than rooted in the quality of the show itself. It's not the writing or the animation, both of which are lacking, that have won over critics. Instead, the show has been praised mainly for its inclusion of queer themes and the progressive messages it conveys. That seems to be enough for some media outlets to label it a success. However, the general audience, particularly longtime Tomb Raider fans, have had a very different response. They're more concerned with the show's actual quality and how well it adapts the beloved video game franchise. Unfortunately, it hasn't lived up to their expectations. Enter Critical Drinker, the ever-outspoken movie critic and gamer who has stepped in to represent the fan's voice. As both a longtime gamer and a fan of the Tomb Raider franchise, he's well-equipped to critique the show from an authentic perspective, unlike the mainstream journalists who seem more focused on political angles.
Anyway, for the most part, it's your standard Tomb Raider setup. We've got a bad guy trying to unleash powers beyond his control, so Lara has to travel around the world in a race against time to recover the 4 pieces before Charles does. I say, old boy, this calls for some hard-core moping. Not to mention the classic staples of all good Tomb Raider games: interpersonal dramas, daddy issues, a good bit of crying, and a possible lesbian relationship. Oh yeah, Lara's gay now, by the way, or at least as heavily implied as the writers could possibly get away with, because heterosexual relationships in modern entertainment are rarer than female apologies these days. You know when you construct an image of a showrunner for something like this, and you keep telling yourself, nah, that's just a cliche, they can't possibly look like that. Well, there you go. Anyway, flash forward 3 years or so, and we're introduced to a much tougher and more experienced Lara, who for some reason is having a fistfight with a woman in a lucha libre mask. And at that moment, I knew that this show was fucked. See, I get why they did this. They wanted to show the audience how much of a tough, tenacious fighter Lara is now, taking a beating but refusing to back down against a superior opponent, and how she's no longer the naive young woman that we saw in the intro. That's nice and all, but the thing is, it completely misunderstands the essence of her character. Lara Croft isn't some lumbering brawler who gets into bare-knuckle boxing matches for fun. She's supposed to be smarter, more sophisticated, and cooler-headed than that. She's an adventurer, not a fighter, and she doesn't have to prove herself to anyone. The thrill for her is exploring the unknown, finding the unfindable, overcoming obstacles, and outthinking traps and enemies. Yeah, she'll defend herself when she has to, but in that case, she's more likely to resort to guns than fists. violence. You know, because guns are actually pretty good at leveling the playing field, and they allow someone who isn't particularly big or strong to hold their own against bigger opponents. But oh well, whatever.
Critical Drinker didn't just review the show, he even live-streamed gameplay from the remastered Tomb Raider trilogy on his gaming channel, showing his deep connection to the franchise. In this video, we'll dive into his honest take on Netflix's adaptation, compare it with the media's glowing reviews, and explore the internet's reaction to the show as well. Starting with Critical Drinker himself, he admitted that he made the mistake of getting his hopes up for the series. It's a mistake many of us have made, giving new adaptations a chance, hoping they'll prove us wrong and turn out to be better than expected, even if the odds are stacked against them. As Critical Drinker points out, it's getting harder and harder to rely on journalists to provide honest critiques. Instead of assessing a show's true quality, many of them seem driven by personal agendas, praising anything that aligns with their worldview. The media's reaction to Tomb Raider is just another example, with outlets like CBR claiming that Netflix's version of Lara Croft fixed 28 years of Tomb Raider mistakes. And then there's The Guardian, which ran an article titled "Goodbye Cartoon Breasts, Hello Sweatstains, the feminist reinvention of Tomb Raider." It's clear from these headlines alone why these journalists are so quick to champion the show. As evident from the reactions on social media, particularly the tweet that got ratioed with far more comments and quote tweets than likes, it's clear the public isn't on board with the journalist narrative. And the reason is obvious: these journalists aren't genuine fans of Lara Croft. Their focus is more on pushing an agenda or the message rather than understanding what truly makes the character iconic. Fans, on the other hand, are much more invested in things that matter. Is the show faithful to the essence of Lara Croft? Does it capture her character, her appearance, her personality, and her motivations correctly? These are the details that real fans who make up the majority of the audience for a show like this actually care about. Netflix seems to have missed the mark with these elements, and that's a problem. If loyal fans tune in for an episode or two and see that the show isn't even trying to stay true to the source material, they'll likely check out. Why would they continue watching if the show gets everything wrong about a character they love? Critical Drinker, however, is a bit of an exception here. He watched it all, but only because that's what he does. He watches these disappointing adaptations so he can tell everyone else why they shouldn't waste their time. And of course, he gets paid for it. It's a lifestyle that allows him to sift through the garbage and deliver honest, unfiltered reviews. Unlike the journalists who celebrate this version of Lara Croft, even when she acts completely out of character, Critical Drinker doesn't hold back. He sees right through the changes and criticizes how they've transformed Lara from a smart, tactical weapons expert into a mindless brawler, engaging in hand-to-hand combat for no good reason. Lara, real fans know that this behavior doesn't align with who she is. Critical Drinker and the fanbase understand that Lara's strength doesn't come from brute force, it comes from her intelligence, resourcefulness, and her ability to outthink and outmaneuver her enemies. It's not that the audience doesn't understand the intent behind the writer's choices. It's clear they're trying to portray Lara as a strong woman who can hold her own in a fight, but as Critical Drinker explains, Lara's strength has never been about physical power. Writing her as a physically dominant character misses the point entirely. The writers behind the Netflix show don't grasp the core essence of who Lara Croft is. They seem to believe that a strong female character must be someone who is physically imposing, able to take down even the strongest men. But that's never been Lara. She's always been a strong character, but not because she could throw a punch harder than anyone else. Lara's strength comes from her bravery, her intelligence, her tactical skills, and her survival instincts. She's someone who knows how to handle a wide range of weapons, outwit her opponents, and navigate dangerous situations. The fact that she's a survivor is key to her character's strength, especially after the reboot trilogy, which focuses heavily on her ability to endure and keep going despite all odds. That's what makes her truly strong. Most people would break under the pressure she faces, but Lara keeps fighting, keeps surviving. That's her strength. But in today's media landscape, it seems like many writers believe that if a female character isn't physically overpowering, she's weak. And of course, in modern entertainment, there's no room for a weak woman. As Critical Drinker points out, the Tomb Raider anime, much like many other shows today, is written for a modern audience that demands this kind of portrayal. The showrunners themselves seem to follow a predictable formula. It's no surprise that the showrunner behind this adaptation is described as a stereotypical social justice warrior, overweight with a distinctive haircut often associated with certain political views. And unsurprisingly, the show checks off all the familiar boxes required for a modern audience: a diverse cast, masculine women, feminine men, and of course mentions of climate change, sexism, and racism. Plus, the LGBTQ representation is front and center. Now, it's not just that they turned Lara Croft into a lesbian and gave her a non-binary partner named Joe, formerly Jill. The show seemed to go out of its way to constantly remind viewers of these aspects. It's as if the characters' LGBTQ identities needed to be showcased as their defining traits. And that approach has sparked significant backlash. Many fans, Critical Drinker included, have voiced concerns that the show overdoes it, making the characters' identities more about stereotypes than authentic representation. In trying so hard to highlight these elements, the show inadvertently made them a point of criticism rather than a natural part of the story. This has led to countless videos and online discussions critiquing the show. And while it's clear the writers didn't intend to stir up homophobia, their heavy-handedness has angered even open-minded viewers. The frustration wasn't just about Lara's sexual orientation, it also extended to other character changes like turning Zip, previously a charming ladies' man, into a stereotypical gay character. Tomb Raider fans, many of whom have no issue with LGBTQ representation in general, felt alienated by these drastic changes in character design and personality. What makes matters worse is that the show couldn't even get its main character, Lara Croft. Lara is the one character that the writers absolutely had to nail. After all, her name is in the title, and she's the reason most people tuned in. Even those unfamiliar with the games know who Lara Croft is, so you would think the showrunners would prioritize staying true to her essence. Instead, Lara was the biggest disappointment in the entire series. Despite being the central figure with the most potential, she ended up as the most wasted opportunity. This adaptation is set after Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the conclusion of the Survivor trilogy, which served as a prequel to the original games. But even though these games already strayed from Lara's original backstory, the show made it clear that this version of Lara wasn't the same iconic character fans had grown to love over the years. As Critical Drinker explains, the writers failed to capture what made Lara Croft so special, leading to a massive letdown for fans who hoped for more. And this is where it gets complicated, so I won't waste much of your time attempting to explain the timelines to you. There are enough videos out there doing that. But in short, as far as I know, there are three main versions of Lara Croft. First off, the original version who was in the first 6 games. Then there's the version from the Legend trilogy. And finally, the version from the Survivor trilogy, which is the prequel trilogy, the newest one. And now they want to melt all 3 timelines down to one to create one unified timeline, even though I don't know how they're going to do that, because it honestly makes no sense. And this show takes place between the Survivor and the original trilogy. So its task was to be the bridge between the two, to tell a story where Lara goes from the teenager/young adult survivor and becomes the professional Tomb Raider of the original games. And they failed at doing that. Her being so whiny and a lesbian are already totally out of character for the original Lara, but how should the showrunners have known that, right? They probably haven't even played the original games. Cause as Critical Drinker says, even apart from those 2 aspects, they got her character entirely wrong. The show that journalists are praising for being the feminist reinvention of Lara Croft turned her into a crybaby that's beholden to men at all times. Make it make sense to me. Once again, yet another aspect that people are complaining about. That this isn't the badass Lara we all know and love. The one time they have a girl boss character who's known for being a girl boss and they write her as an insecure emotional wreck, and I'm not over-exaggerating with the crybaby part. She's literally crying or whining so much in that show. Look, I'm not a douche. I've got nothing against people crying. Whether women or men cry, that's not always a sign of weakness. It's quite healthy and actually quite brave to do that sometimes. But I mean sometimes. Lara, on the other hand, is constantly crying. In many scenes, there's more crying or whining than talking. And that's not really in the character for someone like Lara Croft. But it's not just Lara that this show got wrong, but literally the entire cast of characters. The situation becomes even more convoluted when discussing the various versions of Lara Croft across the game franchises. To simplify, there are 3 main iterations of her character: the original Lara from the first 6 games, the Lara from the Legend trilogy, and finally the version from the Survivor trilogy, which is a prequel to the original games. Now, the show aims to merge all these timelines into one cohesive narrative. However, this idea raises questions about how they'll pull that off, as it seems overly ambitious and ultimately nonsensical. The series is set to connect the Survivor trilogy with the original games, acting as a bridge to narrate Lara's transition from a teenager and young adult into the seasoned Tomb Raider we all recognize. Unfortunately, they failed in this mission. The portrayal of Lara as whiny and overly emotional strays far from the confident and capable character established in the original series. It's hard not to wonder if the showrunners have even played the classic games, as Critical Drinker suggests. Beyond just her sexual orientation, the fundamental essence of her character is misrepresented. This show, heralded by some journalists as a feminist reinvention of Lara Croft, instead depicts her as a needy character constantly dependent on men. It simply doesn't align with the badass persona we've come to admire. Critics have pointed out that this is not the empowering female figure that fans remember. Instead, she is portrayed as an emotional wreck. The frequency of her crying in the series borders on excessive. While I recognize that crying isn't inherently a sign of weakness, it can be a healthy expression of emotion. Lara's constant tears feel out of place for someone who is supposed to embody resilience and strength. In many scenes, her crying overshadows any meaningful dialogue, which detracts from her character's core attributes. But it's not just Lara who suffers from poor characterization in this adaptation. The entire supporting cast is also misrepresented. The dynamic between characters, which should ideally showcase growth and resilience, has instead been replaced with a series of emotional cliches that fail to resonate with fans. Overall, the show doesn't just miss the mark on Lara Croft, it seems to disregard what makes any of the characters engaging or relatable, leaving viewers feeling disappointed and frustrated. The quality of characters in any narrative largely hinges on the skill of the writers behind them. In this case, it's evident that the writing team lacks the talent necessary to bring the beloved character of Lara Croft to life authentically. As Critical Drinker points out, apart from the voice actors, there's little to commend about the show. Comparing it to Arcane, another Netflix adaptation that features strong female characters, highlights this disparity. Arcane showcases not just one, but two compelling female leads, a powerful fighter and a clever weapons expert. Both characters are well developed, with distinct personalities and rich backstories that resonate with audiences. In contrast, the characters in the Tomb Raider series fail to make an impact. Arcane not only boasts superior writing, but also offers visually stunning animation that elevates it to a cinematic level. It truly feels like a high-budget film rather than just another animated series. For anyone who hasn't seen Arcane, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a personal favorite of mine, and I'm excited for the upcoming second season. As Critical Drinker suggests, investing your time in quality shows like Arcane is far more worthwhile than enduring the disappointment of the Tomb Raider adaptation, especially if you're a fan of the original character. Once again, Critical Drinker delivers a more insightful and entertaining review than many mainstream journalists who often miss the mark in understanding what fans want. If the creators of this series prefer to cater to journalists and the so-called modern audience, that's their choice. However, it's clear that fans and the general audience are the ones who will drive viewership. I'm not discouraging anyone from watching the Tomb Raider show, that's a personal decision, but I would strongly suggest prioritizing your time with shows that genuinely deserve your attention and respect, especially if you hold Lara Croft as one of your favorite gaming characters. This series, unfortunately, feels like a betrayal to every fan of the franchise. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. That wraps up today's discussion, and I hope you found value in this video. If you did, please consider leaving a comment, hitting that like button, and subscribing to the channel for more content.